All right. Hello, everyone. This is Eric from the D20 Initiative, and I'm here with DM Tyler.
Hello.
And this is our second video in our How to Play D&D 5th Edition series that we're creating to help out new and old players alike. Today we're going to cover some more of the basics, and we're going to go over dice, ability scores, skill checks, saving throws, attack rolls, and proficiency bonuses. It sounds like a lot, and it kind of is, but we'll get through it and try to make this as painless as possible. So with that, let's have Tyler begin with the first die that we'll be discussing.
All right. So this game uses a multiple polyhedral dice with different numbers of sides. You can find these dice in game stores and in many bookstores. And the first one we'll talk about is the D4, which is a pyramid-looking thing. Let's roll this here.
That's cocked.
That
How do you roll a cocked die on a fucking roll 20? I'm sorry, go ahead.
How do you roll? Okay, so that is cocked. As you saw, the numbers were not all laying on a flat side, so let's roll that again. Okay, so that rolled a 1. On this D4, you roll on which number appears straight, in line, normal. This one, it's on top you would read from. Some D4, you're read from the bottom. Then next we'll have the D6.
Well, before we get to the D6, where would we expect to see the D4 in play?
The D4 comes in not often. There's a few weapons like a dagger, or there's traps that do D4 damage. It's not used a whole lot.
Yeah, that's true, but I mean, you'll see them.
The D6s, the D8s, and the D20s.
Yeah, a lot more
than the D4.
Yeah, I think the most popular time, or the most common time you're going to see the D4s is during a magic missile spell, or when somebody's using a healing potion. And
Right.
and the way the dice work are, whenever you're asked to roll a die, it'll give you a number before the die. So, for instance, if a magic missile spell cast at first level, casts 3 missiles, you're going to roll 3d4 and then add 1 to each one. So that's how it would work there. Some people play it where, a single d4 is rolled, and that's the same for each missile, but that'll be variant upon the table. All right, so the next dice up is going to be the d6. The d6 is probably the most common die that everybody will be familiar with in this game because it's used in pretty much every single game out there and gambling and whatnot. But a d6 is, it looks like a cube, and it's a 6-sided die. And here, let me pull that up real quick. All right, so that's a d6. There's 6 sides on it, and the face that's facing up is the number that you're going to use. So same thing as before. If you need to roll 2d6 or 3d6 or 4d6, which is a method used to roll ability scores, which we'll get into later, all you would do is if somebody says roll 4d6, then you literally take 4 6-sided dice. I don't know why I did that. You would take 4 6-sided dice. There we go. And then you would take up your total. So in this instance, it would be 10. Some instances in where you're going to see a d6 come up is going to be like with some like a short sword or a great sword. You're going to roll 2d6 for their base damage. The fireball spell starts off with the 8d6. So if you were going to cast a fireball spell and the damage is 8d6, then I can't do that here. So what I would do is I would type in or take 8 6-sided dice and roll them all together, and you can do a count, and that's pretty much what it looks like. And all you're going to do is add them all up, and then that's going to be your total. So in this instance, we got a total of 26. The next die up is going to be the D8.
Yeah, the D8 is used for a lot of classes' hit points. You're looking at rogue, warlock, bard, stuff like that. Also a lot of martial weapons that a fighter would use rolls a d8, so you're looking at warhammer, longsword, stuff like that. It is probably the second most common damage dice out there.
Why don't you show us what that
Roll
looks
that
like?
here. Yeah, so roll. Hey, look, an 8.
Hey, 8 on an 8. Good deal. All right, the next die that's going to be discussed is the D10. This one also isn't as common as the others mentioned. The D10 is going to be used for rolling hit points in a lot of your martial classes, like the Paladin, the Ranger, and the Fighter. And there's a couple of different attacks out there that have D10s. I can't think of any offhand. But
The longsword and the warhammer, if you wield them with 2 hands, they upgrade to a D from the D8 to the D10.
oh yeah, the versatile property. That's something that we're going to get into later too. There's a lot of different, rules that can be applied to, a lot of different situations. But we're just trying to keep this real simple, for right now. So a D10, if you were going to roll that, it would look like this, right? And it's a die that has 10 sides. Another important time that you'll see D10s rolled is sometimes when somebody asks for what's called a percentile dice, and that's where you're gonna roll 2 different D10s. Normally one of them will have the tens on it, like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and then one will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like that. If you don't have a D10 that has the tens on it, then what you could do is use 2 different colored die, to represent, which one's going to be the tens or which one's going to be the ones. And we used to do this, back in the day where, our DM would take a red and a blue D10, roll both of those, and then they would call red or blue. And then, whichever color was chosen was, that represented the tens spot. So if somebody wanted to roll a percentile, this is going to be a bad example because they're the same color. But actually, you know what? I'm going to roll one, and I'm going to have Tyler roll one because it's a different color, and we're going to go with white as the tens. So let's go ahead and do that now. Oops.
Mine roll. There we go.
Okay, there we go. All right, so he rolled a 2, so that would be 20. And then I would roll, or then the second die would be a 1. So out of 100, we just rolled a 21. Okay? The next die up is going to be the D12. Why don't you tell us about that?
The D12 you will hardly see at all. It's the Barbarian's hit dice, also used for the Great Axe, and I believe Witchbolt uses the D12, but it is very uncommon. Let me roll that here so you guys can see what it looks like. It's very uncommon die. Like I said, you only see it in the very few instances. The next we'll talk about is the D20, the little dice that controls the game.
Yeah, the D20 is probably the most popular die out there outside of rolling damage. This is going to be used for, excuse me, this is going to be used for so many different things. Making attack rolls, making skill checks, making ability checks, making saving throws. This can also be used as a D10 if you don't have a D10 for whatever reason. All you would do is ignore the first number if there is one. So I'll roll it again because this one's being covered. But for instance, if you wanted to roll this as a D10, then that would be a 9. Now, if I had rolled a 19, that would also be a 9. So remember, just ignore the number in the 10 spot if you're going to use these as a D10. Although you should have D20s because, it's the most popular thing out there. So that's pretty much real simple, a real simple description of the different types of dice that are used in this game. And from here, let's talk about ability scores. I have it over here opened up on the screen so everybody can read along with us. And pretty much your ability scores are going to, they're going to be 6 different numbers that are generated to determine, how your character performs in certain areas of gameplay. There's 6 different scores as mentioned, so it's going to be strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Each of these has a different way of being applied in the game, and we'll have Tyler start off with strength.
Yeah, strength is the measurement of your natural athleticism and bodily power. If you're lifting up a boulder or trying to stop it from rolling down onto your party. That will determine how well you're able to do that. There's 3 classes that strength is important for. That is the barbarian, fighter, and paladin, even though you can use dexterity for all those classes as well. There's also a few races that give you a natural bonus to your strength. You're looking at dwarf, dragonborn, half orc, and sometimes humans, half elves, I believe. You can increase your strength as well if you want. But next, we'll be talking about dexterity.
All right. Dexterity measures a character's physical agility, reflexes, balance, and poise. It's important for the monk, ranger, and rogue characters. Dexterity is going to be really important for determining what kind of bonus you get to your armor class. It's your ability to dodge out of the way of an attack, depending on what type of armor you're wearing. It's going to help you determine the modifier that you use when using a finesse weapon, which we'll get into, or a ranged attack, that's not based off of strength. And it's also going to play a big role in, your dexterity saving throw, which is used to avoid a lot of bad situations, that your characters can come across. There are a couple of other things that, dexterity will come into play with, but, again, we're just keeping these real simple. A couple of races here that are mentioned that get a dexterity bonus are the elf, the halfling, the forest gnome, and the base human, which sometimes we like to call the vanilla human. They get a bonus to each and every one of their stats. But we're gonna have videos in the future that discuss the different races and how to build characters and whatnot. So next up is gonna be Constitution.
Right. Constitution is your measurement of health, stamina, and overall vitality. This stat is important for every single class. Do not, for the life of your character, do not dump Constitution. There's a few classes that give you a bonus. They're looking at dwarf, some halflings and gnomes, and again with the half orcs and humans. Constitution will help you ward off poisons or the effects of alcohol, how well your body is able to handle extreme temperatures and the effects of a traveling day, fighting off exhaustion, stuff like that.
Well, Constitution is also very important if you're going to be a concentration spellcaster.
That's correct.
If you're, we'll get into this in more depth later on, but if, certain spells, they have a duration that your caster has to maintain concentration on. And every time that character winds up taking damage or gets interrupted or anything like that, your Constitution modifier is going to determine how successful your character is at maintaining that spell or, whatever it is that they're trying to do. Speaking of spellcasters, next up is going to be Intelligence. This is going to be a measure of your character's mental acuity, information recall, analytical skills, ability to do research, ability to discern, information based on clues that are found, stuff like that. It's really important for the wizard class, and now there's also the artificer class, or artificer, depending on how you say it, where, intelligence is going to be the biggest factor in determining, that class's success with certain abilities, skill checks, and how much stuff they're able to learn, memorize, things like that. Certain races right out the PHB are naturally inclined towards, the intelligence, statistic or ability score. Sorry, and that's going to be the high elf, the gnome, the tiefling, and the human. Same deal, humans, they get a +1 for everything for the vanilla humans. And is there anything that I missed on intelligence? And if not, hop onto wisdom.
No, I think you covered most of the important stuff of intelligence. And wisdom is your ability to perceive the area around you, or to have an insight on intentions of people or creatures, and just measures your overall intuition. The stat is really important for clerics and druids, where their spellcasting is based off of their wisdom. Some skills that you might use wisdom for. You're looking at perception, which is your ability to sense what's going on around you. You're looking at insight, which lets you, read the intentions of another person or creature, stuff like that. And some basic PHB races that give you increase. You're looking at the Hildorf, Wood Elf, and of course the human.
Humans are pretty versatile. That's where their strengths lie. They don't have dark vision. That's pretty much their biggest downfall. So, and they don't really have any other special abilities. So their versatility is their strength, and that's reflected in the universal +1 to all of their stats.
Do you think of anything else that we can add to wisdom?
I know wisdom has a good benefit in protecting versus certain spell effects. I believe like charms and stuff, but yeah, it's just it's your strength of will, for the most part, and yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. Next up is going to be charisma. Charisma is a measurement of a character's confidence, eloquence, and leadership. It's important for the bard, sorcerer, and warlock classes, and charisma is going to be used mainly for social interaction, which is a pretty important part of this RPG or role-playing game, and it's pretty much like your character's sense of self. Where wisdom would be your sense of will, this is going to be your sense of self, like how strong is your personality. A lot of great leaders throughout history have had exceptionally high intelligence scores. I mean, not intelligence, well, yeah, intelligence hopefully, but charisma scores. And it's pretty much just your your ability to persuade people, haggle with people, negotiate, intimidate, or pretty much influence the way another person may feel about any given situation or about you. The bards, sorcerers, and warlocks, they're spellcasters that their modifiers are based on their charisma score, because a lot of their powers and their abilities come from their characters sense of imposing their will on other people, whether for beneficial reasons or something that's going to hinder them in some way. Out of the PHB, some of the races that give a bonus to your charisma are going to be the half elf, the drow or dark elf, lightfoot halfling, the dragonborn, our favorite human out here, and the tieflings. And is there anything else you want to say about charisma?
Just a quick anecdote. Like, you might hear while you're playing that your party's face might come out of block. That term just basically is another way saying your party member with the highest charisma, they might be the ones to take over for any bartering or haggling or talking down a guard, stuff like that. It's just a little.
Yeah, that's true. Because I remember even like in some of the older editions, and this wasn't like an official rule, but it was just like a rule amongst ourselves where whoever had the highest charisma in the group usually took on the role of leader. And for that same reason, like they're the face of the party. They're the ones who are gonna do, most of the interaction. If you're up before a king or a queen, and you're beseeching their favor, you're probably gonna have a better chance of succeeding if the character interacting with them mainly has a high charisma. If you have a typical barbarian, which usually doesn't have a high charisma, the negotiations might not be as successful, and they might actually become harmful. So that's pretty much like a wrap up of the 6 different ability scores that are attached to each of the characters in D&D 5th edition or most other role-playing games. And I guess from there we're going to go to
your ability modifiers, which are the main driving force behind how ability checks work. There is a table to help determine the modifier from which you roll, but a simple way to determine it without consulting the table is to subtract 10 from the ability score and then divide that result by 2, and then you add that modifier next to each of your scores, and then that leads into ability checks. Ability check tests the character's or monster's innate talent and training in an effort to overcome a certain challenge. The DM calls for the check when a character or monster attempts an action other than an attack that has a chance of failure. When the outcome is uncertain, the dice determine the results. We'll touch briefly on the difficulty class, or DC, that is the determining factor of success or failure for the ability checks. So let's go with a medium difficulty class of 15. Let's just do a basic wisdom check to determine if you can see the creature hiding in the bush. So you roll a d20. You know the DC is 15. So you roll a 10. Say you have a modifier +2. That means you roll a 12 total, and that is below the DC of what your DM called for. So usually that is a failure. Next, there are ability contests, which is the directly opposed between a character and a character, or a character or monster. If you want to talk about that, Eric.
Yeah, definitely. All right, opposed or contested skill checks or ability checks is when one character is trying to do something against another character or monster. So in the example that was given above, if a rogue, let's say you're traveling throughout the woods and there's a bunch of bandits that are hiding off the road, they're going to make what's called a stealth ability check. In order to make a stealth ability check, you're going to take your dexterity, right? You're going to take that modifier, whatever you have, and then you're going to add a skill modifier if you're proficient with that skill. We'll get into proficiency bonuses a little later on. So let's just say, for example, let's just play this out. So my bandit, let's say, has a dexterity of 16, which is a +3 modifier, and has proficiency in stealth, giving it +2. So it's going to be a total of +5. What I'm going to do is I'm going to roll a d20. I'm going to add 5 to it. Okay, so that's a 3 + 5, so that's an 8. Now that's really not too good of a number, but there's still a chance that whoever's looking at them might not see them. So let's have Tyler's adventurer make a perception check to see if they see my bandits that are hiding 60 feet ahead. Go ahead and roll that.
Just use the same +2 wisdom from before. No proficiency in the perception skill to see if we can see the bandits. And I rolled a 19 +2, which is a total of 21.
All right, so a 21 is definitely higher than an 8. So what would happen in that instance is your dungeon master or game master would give some kind of description. As you're traveling down the road, you notice a bush that seems out of place up ahead. What would you like to do? And then the story would progress from there. So that's just an example of one type of contested role. Another one would be, let's say you're a rogue and you just succeeded in stealing the great gem of Halalala from, the gnomish jeweler. As you're running, a couple of guards catch you, and you're going to try and lie your way out of the situation. I'm going to pretend to be the guard. Tyler's going to be the thief with the gem, and let's see how this could play out. Holt, what are you doing at this time of night in this area?
Nothing. I don't know what you want.
Okay. Okay, now me as a DM, I feel he's full of shit. So what I'm going to do is my guard is going to make an insight check versus, his rogue's deception check. So guards, for the most part, they're really, they're just kind of like average people, so they will have a wisdom modifier of +2. Let's say their wisdom is a 10, right? But I will give them proficiency with insight because they're used to looking for things that are kind of out of the ordinary and dealing with unscrupulous people. So what I'm going to do is, since they have proficiency, the base proficiency modifier is +2, so I'm going to take a d20 and I'm going to roll that and add 2. All right. So I rolled an 11 plus 2, so 13. So now, in order for the guard to believe what the rogue is saying, they have to roll a 13 or higher. So let's see if that happens.
And so, my rogue might not be the most confident guy, but to cover his ass, he is trained in the art of deception. So we'll say his charisma is a 12, which gives him a +1, and proficiency in deception will give him a +2 for a total of +3. And so as he tries to lie his way to freedom, I rolled a 6 plus 3 is a total of 9. So the guard will probably see through my lies.
Yeah, so the guard is definitely going to feel like something's definitely not right. So, that situation can turn out a bunch of different ways. Ideally, it'll, lead to some more role playing, like, hey, I don't believe you, you shouldn't be here, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes it leads right to combat, and, that's where we'll call for initiative, which is another ability check. We'll touch on that in a little bit, though. So let's see. After contested rolls, we have just general skill checks, which we already did.
Well, before we move on, we should talk about if the contest results in a tie, the general rule is that the situation remains the same as it was before. So let's say you were holding a door closed and a monster was trying to break in. If you both roll, say, a 15 for an athletics check, the door will remain closed, and then you go from there. That's just
that's pretty important, definitely.
Yes.
All right. So then, so let's just get more into like the different types of skill checks. I'll start with strength, and then we'll just run throughout the list. But okay, whenever you roll an ability check or a skill check, what you're gonna do is, it all goes back to that D20. So you're gonna take your D20, you're gonna take your ability score modifier, whatever that is, and then if you're proficient with the skill or tool or whatever, then you get to add what's called a proficiency bonus. Certain classes certain characters have what's called expertise, which allows you to double your proficiency bonus, but we'll get into that at another time. So there's only one skill here listed underneath the strength ability score, and that's called athletics. Athletics is going to be used, to perform feats of strength. So if you want to climb something that's, exceptionally difficult to climb, if you want to try and bust down a door that's stuck, if you want to try and, grab a wagon that's filled with a bunch of grain and knock it over, to prevent a bunch of guards from continuing to chase you. All of those different, events are going to fall underneath the athletics ability score. The DM will tell you exactly what type of roll to make, but if an athletics roll is called for, that's how you would do it. The next one up is going to be dexterity, and there's 3 under there. We'll have Tyler start with acrobatics.
Yeah, acrobatics is, if you ever go to a circus or see somebody on the, high wire trapeze, it's your just general ability to perform, I don't want to oversay dexterity, but it's a dexterous act. It's your ability to, say you want to jump between wall to wall to get onto the roof. Your DM would ask you for an acrobatics check to make sure you don't slip and fall and flat on your face. Next, the sleight of hand, which is either your ability to pick a pocket or remove something from a shelf, or basically hide your movements from the sight of prying eyes. If you want to try to cast a spell without being seen, sometimes your DM would ask you to roll a sleight of hand to make sure your somatic components aren't noticed by guards or whatnot. Then there's stealth, which is just your ability to blend in, hide in the shadows, hide in the bushes. It's pretty stealth is pretty self-explanatory. Next up is
real quick, with stealth, it's very important that you break everything up. So like if you wanted to move silently, that's stealth. If you wanted to hide behind something, that's stealth. Now, certain conditions will prevent this from being possible. If you're in the middle of a brightly lit room and there's nothing for you to hide behind, there's no sense in you even trying to roll to see if you can hide. But that doesn't mean you can't still walk quietly. So it's very important to pay attention to your environment. Stealth, for the most part, a lot of it's going to be based on just avoiding eyesight. So in that situation where you're in a brightly lit room, there's nothing to hide. If you can manage to stand behind somebody, you could probably stealth behind them. And
You're
then you
halfling.
can, yeah, halflings can do that. That's one of their abilities, yeah, where they can hide behind a creature of medium size or larger. You know, um, and if you wanted to, like, let's say, hold your move, so it's like, okay, if they start turning around, I want to make sure that I stay out of their line of sight, then you could do that. But we'll get into like different types of actions during combat and holding actions and all that stuff later on. Right now, we're just
Yeah.
going through
Stealth.
like the
Stealth
simpler
is
things.
stealth sounds simple, but there's a lot of rules attached to how stealth works in combat, outside of combat. It's might be a whole video's worth. You never know.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Because rogues and rangers and just stealthing around in general is very popular. Next up are going to be your intelligence skills. This is going to be stuff that your character has done research on, been taught, or just kind of, just general knowledge. So the first one up here is Arcana. Arcana is going to deal with your character's ability to determine whether or not they know something that's related to something magical, or maybe like information on mythical creatures, or just different stuff that deal with just things like that aren't of a mundane nature. This one's kind of vague, so it's I don't know, it's going to be kind of like very, it's going to vary by table. But if somebody's casting a spell and you can see them casting it, you might want to roll an Arcana check to see if you know what they're casting before the spell is completed. That's going to come into play later on, with certain things like counterspell and things like that. But that's like way, down the line. The next one is going to be history. History is pretty much, it's exactly what it says. If your character, let's say you're traveling and you wind up going to a brand new town, you might see a monument, of a big statue or something sitting by the port. Your character might ask the DM, "Hey, that statue looks interesting. Have I heard anything about it?" Then your DM might ask your character to make a history check. And then they'll determine their DC, to figure out how common that knowledge is. If your character meets or beats that number, then you might get some information. The higher the number, the more information you might get. Again, that's all going to be based on the DM. Next one's going to be investigation, and this one kind of crosses over with perception at sometimes, but we'll describe these all separately. Investigation, for the most part, is deducing information based on clues that have already been found. So let's say you're tracking something throughout the woods. You successfully find the tracks using your perception check, right? Now you might want to try and figure out if there's anything special about this, set of tracks. That's when an investigation check might come in. Again, your DM or GM is going to determine the DC if you meet or beat it using the D20 plus your modifier plus your skill proficiency if you have it. You might get certain information. So looking at the footprints, if you roll really low, then your DM might just say they just look like humanoid footprints, in boots. If you roll really high, they might say this person looks like they're injured, or like they're stepping on their heels weird, which might give some kind of indication that the ground is slippery, or their legs are weak, or maybe they're carrying a lot of weight. But regardless of what it is, you're going to get more information with this investigation skill. Another really important or common time that this skill is used is if your character is doing research in an actual library. You have access to all these different books, tomes, whatever. You might want to spend X amount of time, researching a specific subject. Your DM might ask you to roll an investigation check to determine how much information, if any, you received during that time. The next one up is going to be nature. Same thing with investigation, but this is going to be related to information that deals with nature. Let's say you come across, some wild berries. You don't know if they're poisonous or not. So, you roll a nature check. If you roll high enough, your DM might tell you, "Hey, look, these things aren't poisonous, but they're gonna make you feel a little woozy, or these things are perfectly ripe, and they're gonna be nourishing, you know. So nature, again, it's gonna deal with your ability to identify things in nature, the types of animals that might be found in a specific environment. But the nature, yeah, so nature is going to pretty much just give you information based on things found in nature. Religion is kind of like history, but it's pertaining to a specific religion, right? Or not a specific, but just religion in general. Your character may understand different religious practices based on different cultures. You might be able to identify different holy symbols. You might be able to identify different things that deal with religion. And the same thing, a DC will always be set with 5 being something that's really easy, up to 25 and 30 or even higher for something that's going to be insanely difficult. So the more studied your character is with religion, the more information your character may be able to know at any given point in time. The next group of skills we're going to talk about is wisdom. Tyler, why don't you go ahead and take over that?
Right. Wisdom check might reflect a effort to read body language or understand someone's feelings. It can be used to notice things about the environment or even care for an injured person. You see the wisdom skills here. We have animal handling, insight, medicine, perception, and survival. Starting with animal handling, it's used to calm down a domesticated animal or keeping your mount under control if it gets frightened by a creature. You can even use it to get a sense about an animal's intentions. Sometimes your GM might call for a animal handling check if you want to try to do a crazy maneuver with your mount that might be outside the realm of normal mount possibilities. Then we have insight. Like we touched on before, this is your ability to determine the true intentions of a creature, such as when searching out a lie or predicting someone's next move even. You use your insight to get clues from body language or speech habits, and even changes in mannerisms to predict an attack or something like that. Medicine, it'll let you, diagnose an illness. It even lets you stabilize a dying companion, which is very important sometimes if you're out of healing. Next is probably one of the most used skills in the game, and that is perception. And that lets you spot, hear, or otherwise detect the presence of anything. It measures your general awareness of your surroundings and the keenness of your senses. For example, you might try to hear a conversation through a closed door or eavesdrop under something, and your GM will call for a perception check to see how well you're able to do that. Like Eric said before, sometimes investigation and perception get a little muddled, but investigation is a little bit more hands-on, while perception is a more of a general view of say you're looking in a bedroom to see if it was anything was taken. Perception would say yes, the bed is knocked over, while investigation would be like, hey, something was taken out of this drawer, stuff like that. And the last one we have is survival, which lets you track, hunt, will guide your group through frozen wastelands or forests. It'll let you identify the signs that maybe a bear is nearby or predict the upcoming weather. And it'll also let you avoid natural hazards such as quicksand. There's other checks that your GM or DM might want you to do, like they'll call for a wisdom check to see how your character feels about the course of action that they're trying to follow, or even if you want to see if something's dead or if it's undead. And then next we have charisma.
All right. Charisma here, again, it's all about, your character's sense of self and their ability to influence another through gestures, speaking with them, just different things like that. So the four skills listed here are deception, intimidation, performance, and persuasion. All right, deception is pretty self-explanatory, but it's not just limited to lying. It's pretty much going to be any way of tricking somebody, through words. Intimidation is going to be, trying to scare somebody. Sometimes you can try and force somebody to do something that they might not want to do. So, like, let's say, for example, the situation before, where the rogue and the guard, ran into each other, and the guard, didn't believe what the rogue was saying. The rogue might try and scare them, and say something like, "Hey, look, I'm a really, powerful, person working with, under the king. It's not in your best interest to say anything, to anybody about even seeing me, or, you can get in big trouble." That can be an intimidation check, and that will be rolled a contested roll versus the guard's insight. Then you have performance. Performance deals with, acting, playing an instrument, maybe performing some kind of show, or something along the lines of where you're trying to entertain somebody. Now, it also can be used if you're trying to pretend to be somebody else. So, let's say you wind up, you have a job to where, again, let's go with this rogue. You've been hired to take out an unruly king, and the best way to get into the castle is, that the king has a sweet tooth, for exotic foods and, pastries from a far off land. So you might come up with this whole persona, get the clothing, get the food or whatever, and try and approach to where, you are pretending to be this world-renowned baker from this far-off land, and you're only going to be in town for a short time, and you really want an audience with this king to, try and sell them some of your baked goods to try and open up business relations. That's probably going to be a mixture of, performance because you're pretending to be somebody else, deception, so that way when you're delivering whatever it is that you're trying to get across, can be bypassed by their insight or whatever. There might be some persuasion in there, which we'll get to in a second. And, so, I mean, a lot of these things, even though they have like some specific examples, none of these are written in stone. They can be applied to a bunch of different things. Okay, and then the last one on their skill, the skills for charisma is persuasion. And that's pretty much, you're trying to persuade somebody to do something for you. For example, if you're liking these videos, I'm going to try and persuade you to hit that subscribe button and, maybe check out our page on Facebook. I don't want to roll because I'm just going to assume I got a natural 20 and you're going to hit that button right now. So that's pretty much the way the skills are pretty much handled. So let's see what else we can discuss here.
Well, there's no, as you saw scrolling through, there is no skill attached to Constitution. That is, even though Constitution is highly important, there is no proficiency you can gain from having a Constitution skill. Also, touching back on another skill check that is tied to dexterity is initiative, which doesn't have a proficiency bonus attached to it, but is also a very common skill check.
That's true, yeah. I didn't even think of that. Good call on that. Alright, so then after skill checks, we come up to saving throws, which we kind of touched on briefly in our last video. But just, a quick recap. All of these are going to be done with the D20. Same thing with all these ability skill checks. You're going to roll your D20. You're going to add your ability modifier, whether it's a positive or negative number, and then a possible proficiency bonus, if that. Okay, now saving throws is very important in the game because it determines whether or not your character avoids or minimizes something that already happened. Okay, unlike a skill check where you're going to see if something does happen, a saving throw only gets rolled versus something that has already happened. So, for instance, if your character is walking across that tightrope, you might use your acrobatic skill check to see if you succeed. If you fail by a certain number, then you might make a dexterity saving throw to see if you fall off. Okay, then when you go to fall off, sometimes you might get another skill check thrown in there to see if you can catch on. You know, if you don't catch on, then you're going to wind up falling, and then you might get a dexterity saving throw to see if you can minimize the amount of damage that you took from the fall. So that's how saving throws come into play versus ability skill checks. The skill checks determine whether or not something is going to happen, and a saving throw will determine the effects of something that has already happened.
Death saves, which is a straight d20 roll when your character is at 0 hit points. And the fact that most classes, or pretty much all classes, have a major and minor saving throw. Like a fighter will have
Strength and constitution.
Yeah, so your strength saving throw isn't very common, but you also get your constitution, which is a very very important save to have.
Do they get strength and con?
Yeah, strength constitution.
Okay, yeah, I don't remember. But yeah, that's a good point. There are definitely major, or the major and minor saving throws are pretty much common and uncommon.
So you're looking at, for your common ones, dexterity, constitution, wisdom, and then the other 3, strength, intelligence, and charisma. Charisma's kind of on the cusp, depending on what kind of game you're playing, but those are usually uncommon. Yeah, so, next, attack rolls. That is your basic driving force behind combat. You have multiple different types. You have weapons, either melee or ranged, and then even spells have attack rolls. Your attack roll is a skill check of sorts. Say you were wielding a longsword. So you would have, if you were a fighter, you would have proficiency in that. And say you had a 16 in strength, which would give you a +5 total. So you would roll your d20 against a monster's armor class or AC. So let's say the monster has a AC of 13, and you roll your d20, add your +5, and look, a natural 1, which is an automatic miss when it comes to combat. Side note, natural 1s only are automatic fails in combat. It can be house ruled otherwise, but if you're sticking to the rules as written, this is the only time a natural 1 is bad, or super bad, I should say. Do you want to talk about the type of dexterity attack rolls?
Yeah, definitely. Certain ranged attacks and finesse weapons are, they're a type of weapon that will have a descriptor on them specifically. You can use your dexterity modifier instead of your strength modifier to determine whether or not you hit something with that specific attack. Your dexterity modifier will also be used as the damage modifier in the event you do succeed for a physical attack. So, for instance, if you're playing first level fighter or ranger, you have a bow. Let's say you have a dexterity of 16, which gives you a +3 modifier. You're going to get a +2 modifier for being, proficient with that weapon at first level, which gives you a total of +5. So seeing that, the companion just missed with their attack, the ranger's going to try and come in and save the day and attack that same monster, which had an armor class of 13. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll a d20, add a +5, and hopefully this time I'll roll above a 13 total. So let's see what happens. All right, I got a 19 plus 5. So that's going to be a total of 24. So since that meets or beats the armor class of 13, that attack is going to hit. Now, an arrow normally does a 1d8 points of damage, plus your ability modifier, which in this case is going to be a plus 3 from my dexterity. So what I would do to determine how much damage I do is I take 1d8, I roll that, which is a 4. I'm going to add 3. I don't know why I rolled twice, but I got the same number anyway. So I just did a total of 7 points of damage. Now, that would come off of the creature's maximum hit points or their current hit points. Sometimes there are modifiers involved, like you need magic weapons in order to damage something, or you need a silver weapon, or let's say you have flaming arrows that might do more damage versus certain types of creatures. But again, this is all going to come into later on. But that's pretty much how a ranged or melee attack works. So you're going to take a d20, you take your ability score modifier attached to the attack, which is going to be strength or dexterity, right? Unless another class specifically mentions something else, like for instance a hexblade warlock, they can use their charisma as their attack modifier instead, but we'll get into that later on. And then and then the other type of attack roll is a spell attack. So Tyler, why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so a spell attack is for your spellcasters. It could either be wisdom, intelligence, or charisma. It is for your spells that require a d20 roll to hit instead of a saving throw on the monster's part. So let's use the same monster. It's looking, wounded from the arrow shot, and I am a wizard with, say, the firebolt cantrip. I have a 16 in intelligence, which is a plus 3, which you'll see a lot if you're using standard array. You'll have your main stat around a plus 3 modifier. Plus 2 for being proficient in spell casting, which makes it a plus 5 total. When I cast my cantrip for the armor class of 13, and it's just not my night. So 3 plus 5 is 8. My firebolt goes up over its head, hits the wall behind it. If I would have hit, I would have rolled a d10. And the difference with spell attacks versus a melee or ranged attack is that not all spells add your spell casting bonus. So my firebolt would just do 1 damage unless you have a certain class ability or the spell description says add your spell casting modifier to the damage. So the last thing we're going to talk about is your proficiency bonus, which we've been hinting at the whole video. Starting at level 1, if you look at a class table, which we're looking at the barbarian here, you get a plus 2 with your proficiency bonus, and that will go all the way until you reach level 5, when it increases to a plus 3. And that just keeps going all the way down through your levels, all the way up to a plus 6 when you get to 17th through the 20th level. Proficiency bonus is tied to overall level, not just class level. So if you happen to multi-class, which we'll get into in another video, your proficiency bonus will not suffer because of it. So if you're a 4th level barbarian and a 3rd level fighter, you're still a 7th level overall character, which will still give you the plus 3 for your proficiencies.
Yeah, and then proficiency for the most part is your character can pretty much do just about anything in this game, unless a class, unless the ability in question is specific to a specific class or given by a specific class. Your characters can kind of attempt to do just about anything. Just because you can attempt to do something does not mean that you're necessarily proficient with it. So for example, if you're a wizard and you've never picked up a greatsword in your life and you try to attack with that greatsword, You can try and do it, but because you're not proficient, you will not get the proficiency bonus with that attack. Okay, there are a bunch of different rules that are, associated with that, and we'll get into that another time, but just for example. So again, let's use this wizard again for the same, example. If your wizard wants to try and be sneaky, they can still try and perform a stealth check, but if they're not proficient, then they won't get the additional proficiency bonus modifier. Okay, some DMs require certain skills or abilities, in order for you to even try them, you need to be proficient. For example, a thief, or somebody trying to pick locks. If you don't know how to use the tool set, some DMs might just say, no, you don't know how to use it, and you'll automatically fail. But if you are proficient, then that's when the proficiency bonus will come into play. And that works for everything, whether it's a skill check, a saving throw, a weapon proficiency, anything like that. If, just because you're not proficient with it, doesn't mean you can't attempt it. Again, this is depending on each game or each table. And the proficiency bonus is just that. It's just the modifier that you're going to add to another roll. It's pretty simple, and like Tyler said, it's tied to your total character class level, and because like in a lot of older editions, a wizard, regardless of whether you were first level or 20th level, your chances of hitting something with a dagger were slim to none. 5th edition, it's a lot more versatile, where there's a lot of crossovers with different types of characters, so your proficiency bonus will allow you to do a lot more things. I feel that 5th edition is more of a heroic type game, where you're the main characters in this epic adventure that you and your friends are going on. So your proficiency is whatever you're proficient with will give some kind of proficiency bonus, if it's skill related or skill check related, and that's pretty much how it works. So that's going to pretty much wrap up these videos here. As we've been going, we have a lot more stuff to cover. Next up, we're going to get into the different types of ability score generation methods, and then we're going to actually start going through the different types of classes and races, and we're going to build a character with you guys right here in these videos. So here we go. I'm going to try and make my persuasion check again and get you to hit that subscribe button. Hopefully hit that like button. Share this with your D&D groups. Let us know what you want to see us make for you. Give us some tips. Maybe we're doing something wrong. Maybe we could do something better. Go ahead and put some stuff down in the comments. We're going to make sure we read these, and then we'll adjust accordingly. So with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you learned something with Tyler here and myself, and we'll see you soon. So until then, happy adventures.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. Happy adventures. Whatever.
Yay. We'll get a cool tagline eventually.